Writing a new piece for solo flute is a daunting task. You have one instrument that is only basically capable of playing a melody with no accompaniment. It's tonally vulnerable to all the elements. You just have one player on a stage with nothing else around it. But there are so many things that you can do with the flute. So in today's video, I'm going to demonstrate for you some aspects of my piece Tassasul 1 for solo flute, which I just finished composing in early 2022. But before I get into talking about the composition itself, I want to talk to you a little bit about why I wrote the piece in the first place. About 6 months ago, I realized that I don't have any pieces in my catalog that are actually written exclusively for solo instruments. I had a few pieces for solo trumpet or solo piano with electronics. I have a piece for the guitar, but nothing that's really a full set of pieces that are meant to be solo pieces for an instrument. Think of something like the Barrio Sequenze, for example. So I set out to do just that. I want to make a set of pieces that are similar in kind of spirit to the Barrio Sequenzas. So I decided to write the piece for flute first. Since then, I've written pieces for the viola, for the harp, for the trumpet, the trombone, and the oboe. And I'm continuing to add to this little catalog of pieces, which I call Tassasul. Tassasul meaning sequenza in Arabic. So that's a little bit of the backstory about this first solo piece for flute. So let's dive straight into Sibelius, where I actually have all the notation written out. Sibelius is my notation software of choice. I know there's Dorico and other kinds of notation that are out there, but I'm so used to Sibelius, this is what I'm just using until I guess Sibelius doesn't exist anymore. But here we go. The most important part, of course, is the actual notes themselves. So as you can see here, there's just a lot of notes. I mean, this is only a 5-6 minute piece, but there are a lot of notes in this piece, as you can see. It just kind of goes on and on and on for 7 pages. So before diving into the mechanisms of the piece, let's just hear a little bit of it first. All right, so there are a few things to note here. The very opening, I go ahead and say Alaberio. I want this to be a reminder of this is a piece based off of the Barrio Sequenza. So if you take a look at these pitches here, A, G sharp, and G natural, that follows exactly with what I have here, which is the Barrio Sequenza. You have A, G sharp, and G natural, which open the piece. So there are these little bit of Easter eggs that happen throughout the piece, which serve as markers for me and for the flute player. The second thing to notice is I have this really punctual da, 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 da motive here in this first system. Now in the MIDI recording that you just heard, you don't really get that aspect of it, but what I'm going to tell you right now is that these notes are not actually pitches that the flute would normally play. This is what we call an extended technique. In other words, we're having the flute player play these notes more like do, 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 do in a percussive kind of way. And you'll see that with this X kind of notation that I have here, along with the staccato. And then I have this note here, a la Jan Marez. The notes in the lower part should be played primarily with key percussion. A slight staccato pulse can be added to amplify the tube resonance. So there is this additional notation that I have here in addition to what you see in the actual pitches. Very important to have this as a descriptor of what we want the flutist to do. The third part of this system is this little motif that I have A, B half flat, D grace note, C, B half flat, and A. And you can see this is a little fragment that gets played over and over again throughout this piece. So you might be asking yourself, what is that little half flatted thing? Well, that's just a microtone, or in this case, it's an exactly 1/4 tone higher than the pitch B flat. So it sounds something like this. And then if we hear the note B flat, which is 1/4 tone down, it sounds like this. And if we hear the pitch that sounds 1/4 tone higher than B half flat, it's this. So in just this one system alone, we have all the building blocks basically of the entire piece. You go on to the next system, you see all that material manifest itself there as well. You see the Jan Mérez style notes in the second voice. You see those ornamented fragments in the top voice there. And then later on in the system, we introduce something that's related to those ornamented fragments, but are a little bit different. And that's this little part that says à la dagger, which is another influence that I took from. If I head over to the dagger score, we will see that I actually took this little bit from this moment right here, and I transposed it, and I added some quarter tones, and I just made it a little bit more of my own. And in this way, I'm making a piece that is a confluence of all the different things that I enjoy in music. I enjoy this aspect of this kind of traditional Arabic music that Dagger uses in his own work. I like this aspect of this French contemporary type music, the Debussy inspired music that Jan Mérez does in his stuff. And of course I like the Italian kind of avant-garde music of Berio that opens up the piece. So I hope what you're taking from this so far is that you don't have to write music that just comes from ground zero. You can take from different kinds of influences, and even here I make it a point that I am taking from these influences and making it my own in the composition process of this piece. Now there's one more composer I haven't mentioned yet who has influenced this piece, especially in the harmonic makeup of how I wrote this piece. But before we get into that, I'd really appreciate if you just ding that like button so that more people that might enjoy watching me demonstrate this thing about the flute can actually watch it. Thank you so much. Right here we see this little marking called à la CPE Bach, which alludes to one of Bach's many children. This is the most famous one, compositionally speaking. And there's this little line from the CPE Bach piece which he wrote for the flute. And I can show that to you right here. This is CPE Bach Sonatina in A minor. Now, as you could hear, one of the biggest factors that makes this piece work is the fact that Bach is actually creating a harmonic language by having the flute play these low notes and then have these high melodies come right after it. So you have the A in the first measure, kind of alluding to the chord A minor, and then you have the F in the third bar, which is kind of alluding to this F major, D minor sonority. And then you have the D in the last bar of the first system, which alludes to a 2/6 chord in the key of A minor. So you have all these different markers in this flute piece which demonstrate that this is actually being harmonically planned, which is what I also wanted to do in my piece. So if you take a look at my piece here, we can actually see that we have some of these pitches. We have the A from the very beginning that Bach used, and then we have the F, but in this case I used an F half sharp, which is the note 1/4 tone above F natural. And then guess what? I do use the D that Bach uses in his piece. So there's already these little allusions to the CPE Bach, but we don't actually get to the CPE Bach quote into the last bit of this system right here, where we actually see a real arpeggio. But instead of the normal notes that we would see from CPE Bach, we actually see the quarter-toned version of it. So I'm going to play for you a little bit of that right now, and just realize that how closely related it is to that kind of style of music. So now that we heard my version of this, listen to CPE Bach's version of the very same thing. As you heard, it's quite obvious that I actually took from that Bach lick and incorporated it into my own style. So this is something that I think is totally permissible when you're writing your own music, to take from other styles and incorporate them into your own. So there are a lot of other things that I'd like to talk about in this piece, but I think I'm going to wait for when I actually get the final recording of the piece, and then we'll revisit this piece at a later date. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave some comments down below if you have any questions about any of the techniques that I used in this piece. And if you enjoyed this, I actually do have a few videos where I actually talk about the creative process of being a composer, and you can watch them right over here. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.